Okay, so what I'm going to talk about really is what we were doing to try and develop an agri-environment programme from the Burren. So it's really about the lessons we learned, the things we did along the way that worked, things that didn't work, and maybe there's a few messages that you can take away from that. As Emma said, boundary of the Burren's a bit iffy. Mine's 720 square kilometres, nearly double hers. We take in a greater area that has carts within it. So again, she's already gone through the habitats, but of that area, about half of it is designated a special area of conservation. Mostly what's left out is the improved agricultural grasslands, a little bit of really nice grassland is left out as well, but about 95% of the Burren is privately owned. So it's the farmers that are actually going to have to deliver the requirements of the SAC when it comes down to it. And we touched on the traditional winter grazing. I'll just say again, cattle go down to what we call the greenland. That's improved agricultural grassland, not what Trump's trying to take over. For the summer, then they move back onto these species-rich limestone grasslands and heaths for the winter. And the importance of that is when they're down on the greenland, the winterages, all the plants getting a chance to flower, set seed, and grow pretty well unharassed by too much grazing. And then the cattle come in for the winter and they're literally taking off the standing hay crop. And that's key to keeping these grasslands and heaths in good condition, because if you don't graze it off, you get build-up of plant litter and all these very light dependent, very small species are lost. And they're the really important species from the Burren. And when it comes to managing the landscape and developing an agri-environment, we're creating one for a mosaic habitats. I know ecologists like to put things in boxes, but you can't manage boxes. If you've got limestone pavement, you can't manage it separately to your calcareous grasslands or your limestone heaths. So we're managing a mosaic. The background to everything was when Ireland joined the European community back in the 1970s, it led to big changes in farming. It was all market driven. Farmers follow the market. They're trying to make a living at the end of the day. We saw a big change in focus and a loss of balance in the Burren. Essentially what happened was they moved away from large numbers of dry stock being outwintered on the winterages with small scale dairy and sheep farming more on the lowlands to suckler herd based enterprises. So farmers were now keeping suckler cows and selling off the weanlings. So what happened was we saw a reduction in grazing on the winterages, and this is where all our really important habitats are, and an intensification of farming on the summerland. So we were seeing cattle being kept in sheds for the winter and silage being made to feed them there. And you'll get it, this had the knock-on impact. So we were seeing winterages become increasingly undergrazed. They're very rarely abandoned. Abandonment is not yet a problem. It could come in more down the line as farming becomes even more and more marginal. There was also an intensification in some ways on the winterages where farmers started bringing up silage and using them as outside slatted sheds. And this had lots of environmental implications, lovely halo of shite around the feeder. Of course, we've hardly any soil, so that's all going into the groundwater, which we then all get to drink. Lovely. And of course, it's a big threat to the low nutrient lakes and turlocks along the way. And the trouble was, none of these problems were being addressed by the Natura 2000 designations that came in 1995, or the first Irish National Agri-Environment Scheme, the REP scheme that came in 1994. In fact, REPS actually exacerbated the undergrazing problems in the Burren because it told farmers you cannot outwinter cattle on species-rich grasslands. So the traditional grazing was gone at that stage. And all they did was they really disenfranchised the farming community. They got very upset, outside experts coming in, telling them what to do, taking over their farming. And they just felt really frustrated and upset about everything. So, I mean, the takeaway from this, everybody pretty well knows who works in conservation, designations, rules, regulations, and one size fits all agri-environment is not going to deliver conservation. And certainly in the Burren, it was not going to manage our grazing dependent habitats. We needed the farmers to do that, and they were all very upset. So all of it started really in the Burren. Our work to develop the agri-environment programme with this man. This is Michael Davern. He's catalyst for everything, and he's a Burren farmer. He'll tell you he's uneducated. He went to private schools and the monks, but Michael Davern's a character. He's more sane than anybody I know. And one of his things was when all the other farmers were railing and everyone was at each other's throats, Michael had this thing: it's better to light a candle to curse than to curse the dark. People saw a value in the Burren, in its landscape, and its habitats, to make that an SAC. So where's the opportunity? That's the way he was thinking. The other thing was he wanted to change the REPS programme so that people could put cattle onto the winterages in winter, as they always had done, and maintain the habitats. And he knew there was a link between winter grazing, traditional management, and the condition of the landscape, the habitats, and the flora. But who's going to listen to a farmer? Nobody, because they don't value their knowledge. So he knew he needed to get scientific proof. So essentially, he sent us on 24 years of learning, and we still are. You never stop learning. He was instrumental in getting funding for a PhD, looking at the impact of agriculture and on the natural heritage of the Burren. That fund was started in 1998. I'll come to these a bit more. That led on to the Burren Life project, which then formed the basis for the Burren Farming Conservation Programme in 2010. These three phases really are very much learning phases, experimental. Burren Farming Conservation Programme was rolled out into Ireland's first locally led agri-environment programme in 2016. So this was actually an official rollout and delivery. And in 2022, the Department of Agriculture took everything over fully and rolled out the Acres programme. Now, it was quite revolutionary and could have done a lot of good. And they have in certain areas the Acres cooperation project zones. There's a reason this is in black. I'm still in mourning. I'm not going to go into it because it's very close to 3 years later. It's very close to the surface and I get really angry. Needless to say, after I banged my head against a brick wall for a while, I ended up walking away with Brendan from it. We couldn't stand over the destruction of everything we'd worked for about 20 years before it. So just to go into a little bit more, a lot of it started with Brendan's PhD, and that involved a lot of talking, listening and learning from farmers. Brendan's brilliant. Brendan can listen to 2 hours of absolute shite talk and take out the two important sentences. I would have been looking out the window after 5 minutes. So really what he did was he went about gathering the farmers' knowledge of the area and their views. He started recognising their expertise in managing that landscape and building trust. There was very little trust between the farming community, environmentalists, conservationists at the time. And essentially, one of the key learnings that comes out of this and takeaways is that farmers have an awful lot of knowledge and expertise to contribute. And in many ways, we should be looking to them more as a solution rather than just being seen as a problem. And that was how they were viewed. The other thing we need to do really is to have a more holistic understanding of what's shaping and influencing the landscape. You get environmentalists, ecologists see it from one side, agriculturalists will see it from the other side, and they're the twain we're meeting. You need them to come together because you can always say, farmers are doing it all wrong, they're making a mess, but why are they doing it? What's driving it? If you can find that, you can find ways of solving the problems. And that's really what happened with the Burren Life project. It was all about building on the knowledge and trust that Brendan had got. Do you remember who he is now? Mm-hmm. We can't remember who this fella is. Hello, Duck.
International thanks, but we don't know.
Yeah, and so essentially the remit of the Burren Life project was about finding local solutions to local problems. So we could develop farming practices which would suit both the environment, the habitats and the farmers of the Burren. Why the farmers of the Burren? Because we needed them as a tool to keep managing all these grazed habitats. So it had to work for them as well. And this saw the coming together of the National Parks and Wildlife Service, Shoggers, it's welcome, and the Burren Irish Farmers Association. Now, the Burren Irish Farmers Association was set up by Michael Davern when he realised that the National Farmers Association didn't give a shite about farmers in the Burren and weren't going to help them. So he set up its own splinter group to work away. And this was really important because it saw wildlife services and the farmers coming together and having to sit at a table and talk civilly. They'd been at loggerheads for a long time. He's looking quite angry at this point. That's him in a calm mood. For years, nobody from National Parks and Wildlife Service would have been allowed onto his land. Things were just so bad. So they did. They started talking. So more talking, more listening to each other, more learning from each other. More importantly, I think this was the phase at which respect started to develop between the conservation and the farming community. Didn't mean that everybody agreed, but they started to at least respect and acknowledge each other's views. So when it came to the finding local solutions to the problems, we worked on 20 life farms. And just to go into three of the main problems we were having: undergrazing on the winterages, which has this impact of affecting the red plant communities and what they support, rapid encroachment of hazel onto these particularly species-rich grassland and heaths, and the issue of feeding of cattle. Now, when it comes to it, it was the conservationists that saw this more of a problem for farmers. This was a problem seen by both farmers and conservationists. This was, again, a problem seen more by the conservationists than the farmers. So how do we go about solving these? So in terms of dealing with undergrazing, we said to farmers, OK, what do you need to graze those winterages better? And it vary in different farms. So some farmers might turn around and say, well, there's no water at the top of the hill. I've got a full-time job elsewhere, so I haven't got time to herd them back to the top of the hill anymore. So they come down for water and stay down. So the tops were getting underground. So we looked at loads of different ways of capturing water, storing water. Could be solar pumping water from the bottom up to storage at the top, gravity feeding. So that was one of the solutions to one of the problems. The other one was reps had paid for farmers to maintain their boundary walls, but not internal walls. So you had one big field instead of multiple fields. So it wasn't worthwhile to the farmers economically to get somebody in to fix the walls anymore, particularly when the next day the goats had already knocked it down and they didn't have time to do it themselves. So we looked at funding internal walls, and this allowed for more targeted grazing. We looked at lots of different ways of scrub controlling hazel predominantly, but also to a certain extent blackthorn and briars. Emma's talked about that. I'm not going to go into it. The last problem was the feeding, and this is one that most conservation projects, oh God, you can't have any supplementary feeding. So we said to them, could you not feed cattle silage? And they went, we've got to feed our cattle. These cows are going on to the winterage in, say, September, October, November, in calf. They're calving up there, a lot of them, in March. So they've got a growing calf inside them. From March, April, they're on a winterage and they're feeding a calf. And what they said is, we can't, the winterage just won't support them later on. So we went round and we collected forage samples from lots of different types of winterages and we analysed it. And what we found was up to Christmas, the winterage generally met the nutritional requirements of an in-calf suckler cow. After Christmas, it didn't. Protein levels dropped off, so they can't digest the feed properly. So yes, they did need to feed this type of stock, and there's no point in asking them to go to other type of stock, dry stock anymore, because there's no money in it. This is the only way they can actually make some sort of a living from farming at the moment. So they're following the market. So what we ended up doing was my colleague James Moran and his associates in Chalgas developed a concentrate feed. This gave them the extra bit of protein they needed. It also gave them trace elements, minerals, and vitamins that they were missing. Wasn't designed to be fed before February, and you'd start off at 1 kilo a head and maybe go up to 3 kilos. You were just filling that missing bit. The advantage of the extra protein is it actually made them graze out winterages better because it stimulated their appetite. So we initially funded, subsidised the feed, and we also provided funding towards meal bins so they could get it up there instead of carrying it up all the time, and feed troughs. So we went away from using feed troughs eventually. And the thing we learned really during Burren Life was the importance of working together and taking and identifying problems that affected all sides, not just the conservation side, not just the agricultural side, exploring solutions that work for both sides, and being prepared to compromise. We'd said you can't feed cattle. We'd have worse grazing on winterages. We needed the cattle to stay there. It's a practical decision. People say you're taking in nutrients. With the concentrate, you're not so much. You have to remember, they go onto these winterages with a pea-sized fetus. They walk off with a calf next to them. There's a lot of nutrients going out that system as well. So some of the main findings along the way, we got a suite of solutions to the problems. Most importantly, we came up with costs and guidelines to these solutions. We got better working relationships with the stakeholders. They could at least talk civilly most of the time. In terms of conservation, we got an improvement in the condition of the grazed habitats on some farms, not all of them. And for the farming community, it was actually a really positive response. They'd felt we'd used a bottom-up approach. So they felt included in the development of the programme, in the development of the solutions. They got a lot of practical support. The local team was embedded, had an office in the middle of the Burren. And they also saw farming benefits, improvements in animal health. Once you stop feeding silage, you move away from having problems with coccidiosis, a parasitic that was affecting the calves. They also, at that time, had reduced feeding costs by going to the meal rather than silage. That's probably shifted again now. But there was other health benefits and farming benefits they came across along the way. One of the important things we realised when we're doing this is if you want to get farmer buy-in to any agri-environment schemes, the actions have to be relevant to them. So it's going to have to be something that will work for them and work with what they need to do. Farmers want to be seen as good farmers amongst their peers. They don't want to be seen as going backwards. So we weren't telling them to change their stock. We were giving them an alternative way of feeding them that had less impact. Farmers watch, learn from and follow other farmers. So if you're going to learn anything about why they're doing things in a landscape, you have to encompass the diversity that's there, not just in terms of enterprise, whether it's cattle, sheep or whatever, but also in types of farmers, age structures, family farms, male, female farmers. You have to take in lessons from all of them. And you need to identify and work with good leaders. We were really lucky. Michael Davern had already stood up and started everything, and he was a man people were prepared to follow. So it made life easy. But you do need somebody who other farmers will respect. You can't go for your left field farmer, because initially your other farmers are not going to follow them. Later on, once they've taken a few steps, they'll start to look at what that left field farmer's doing, and then they'll start to take things from them on board as well. Well, the big question at the end of it was we'd said to the farmers, what do you need to improve your grazing? And we didn't always get the results we wanted. Some farms, we just gave them what they needed and we still didn't get that improvement in grazing. What were we missing? And it comes down simply to incentive. Go back a bit. As I say, most of our farmers are part-time farmers, or they're full-time farmers with another full-time job. It's really tough farming in the Burren if you're trying to do it at winter. It's dark when you get home. You've only got weekends to try and do everything. It's far easier to put your animals in a slatted shed and go in, flick the lights switch, check they're okay, go in, have your dinner and watch telly, than it is to go out and manage them on a winterage. So what was the incentive that we could give them to farm the winterages in the way that we needed to manage the habitats? And essentially, by giving them the money for the actions, we weren't getting it. We needed another carrot to get them on board. And at the end of the day, we concluded we needed very definitely a locally targeted, locally developed agri-environment scheme just for the Burren that would answer our problems, nobody else's problems. And that's what we wrote in our afterlife plan. If any of you were ever involved in life nature funding, you have to write an afterlife plan. Most of them end up on a shelf and never do anything. Essentially what we did was we sketched out our vision for an agri-environment programme in the Burren. And we were really lucky, because we've been lucky along the way. As we were finishing, the single farm payment section of the Department of Agriculture came and said, we've got some unspent single farm payment money and we can spend it in 4 areas, one of it which is biodiversity. Would you like some money? And we said, yes, please. And they said, but the money can only go to farmers. So they funded the farming section. National Parks and Wildlife funded the team in Carrot and the office. And we have to set up a company, HMVS, to actually deliver the programme. So the Burren Farming for Conservation programme really was us testing our ideas of how a results-based agri-environment programme would work. I'm rolling these things two together. It, in 2015, rolled out to become the Burren programme, and they are both essentially the same, with a few tweaks along the way. Except the funding changed. It did come from the section of the Department of Agriculture meant to do environmental work, disastrously usually, and the company. The objectives here were about ensuring sustainable agricultural management, high nature value farmland, contributing positive management of the landscape and the cultural heritage. It's a big archaeological landscape as well, and contributing to improvements in efficiency in water usage. The route we took, it was a locally led, we were still based in the Burren, and it's a hybrid agri-environment scheme. And the reason it's hybrid is it combines paying for results and co-funding supporting actions. The paying for results is that carrot, it's the incentive to get the farmers to deliver what you need. We took quite a different approach. We were non-prescriptive. We told farmers what we wanted. We want species-rich grasslands heath in good condition. Brendan famously said, we don't care how you do it, you can graze them with elephants, zebras and giraffes if you want, just give us what we want at the end of the day. So that gave the farmers the freedom to farm. We delivered it all through quite a simple annual farm plan in terms of results thing, and another plan for the farm works. And there was a lot of support. It was a locally based team. We had trained farm advisors, and we did annual farmer training as well. Because this is all new. You're asking farmers to do something which isn't necessarily the forefront of their minds. So you need to handhold along the way. So the hybrid approach, just to say, payment for results when we brought this in wasn't new. They were doing it already in France and Germany for hay meadows, but their results being designed by ecologists. I'm not an ecologist, I'm actually a large animal parasitologist. So the payment for results they were doing was based on numbers of species. So if you've got a certain number of indicated species, you've got one amount, if you've got more, you've got more money. But for me, that didn't make sense, because if you're just delivering on that result, where's the incentive to actually improve things? Floristically, things can go backwards very quickly, but it takes them quite a long time to improve in a way you can pick it up measurably. So that for me was not enough of an incentive. You need to cast out your line there and hook them. So what was different with us was the way we actually did our results based. Now, I'll come to it in a little bit more detail, but essentially what we were saying is the result we wanted was a good condition of species-rich habitats. Farm advisors would go out and score the fields every year, and they'd get a score from 1 to 10. The higher the score, the better condition, the higher the score, and the higher the payment the farmer would get. Alongside that, they're also getting payment for actions, and these were up to the farmers to decide what they wanted to do to increase their field scores and their farm income, therefore, and to help them keep them farming in the Burren. And this is really important, future-proofing farming. If you need farming to manage habitats, you need to future-proof it in some ways. These actions will come into the office and they'd be approved or not approved by the team. And these feed backwards, sort of in circular. The results the farmers got would decide what work they needed to do to improve their score. So the two things drove each other. Then if they did the work, that would often result in improved score and will get them to do it. And it was all about, the other thing we did is we didn't fund any of the actions 100%. We found farmers didn't actually value something if you gave them 100% of the money. So we put different values on things and funded between 20 and 75% of the cost. So essentially what we were doing was we were making conservation a product of the farming as much as the high quality heifers, weanlings that they were producing and selling. It was another farm product, and farmers understand products and they can be driven by products. So what we were looking to do was really incentivise the farming and get them to deliver and reward those who delivered the best product in terms of the management of the species-rich habitats. So we ended up with two scoring systems. I'm not going to go into detail. Was one for winterages and one for the meadow type. We looked at things like that we knew were issues in terms of grazing stock management, problem species, and for winterages, we didn't do any ecological survey or anything. You eyeball it, you can tell a winterage if it's in good condition or if it's as it should be, if it's been well managed or not. Lots of people over here could never understand that till they came over and went, get it. You would have spent all your time trying to do these things, and they're so variable. We did do indicator species for our meadows, but essentially it's not rocket science. It's really all you're asking: is there a problem? How bad is it? And you have these weighted criteria. So, for example, grazing might go from 15 points to minus 35 points on a sliding scale. So you're starting off thinking every field can get 100%, and then taking marks off. So one of the things these were the issues we had. So undergrazing, damage at feed sites, big issue of damage at springs and natural water sources. Some cases soil erosion, not that bad. Scrub, bracken, Molinia weeds. The biggest driver of our scoring system was grazing. That's the thing we needed to improve. And what you wanted to do, it was this incentive to get people to change. So we wanted, if a farmer had a field score of 6, they went in and they improved their grazing the next winter a bit, their score could go to 7 the next year. They saw that score jump, they saw the money jump, they were on the hook. And then you started to get them to address other issues, because they see this as the same as producing high quality cattle. I can improve my cattle, I can improve this, and I can make money. And we were guaranteeing a price. You weren't getting a guaranteed price for cattle. So the scoring system we had reflected both past management, current management condition, and threats to the future condition. And this was all, again, about carrots. We had detailed scoring guidelines. They're guidelines, they're not hard and fast rules. You could have something where you overgraze a winterage for a whole summer. It's a restoration graze, and then you take it back. So that although you graze it in the summer, then it's not considered overgrazing, but it might be in future years. It's simple, transparent, flexible. Anybody can do the scoring with a little bit of training. Farmers could see where the scores were coming from, and they could understand it and challenge it. It was both a payment system to farmers and also a basic monitoring. We could track changes in average score over time. And I haven't actually put that in, but it did go up over time. We got an increase in field scoring 8, 9 and 10, and a drop off in the ones that have been scoring lower as time went on. As I said, it went through quite a simple payment. It's important that the farmers are linking the payments to a result. So they got a payment sheet which would have the field score on it. It would have the payment they were getting for that field. And it would also, most importantly, have management recommendations, which would indicate how they could perhaps improve their scores the following year by maybe increasing grazing, tackling some of the encroaching scrub, that sort of thing. And there was a map that came with it to relate the field numbers to the fields on the ground. We did a couple of things which are harder to explain. If anyone wants to know, I'll go into it more later, but we banded our payments. Initially, it was in 40 hectare units. We then split off for 10. So you've got higher payments for your first 10 hectares, and then they went down as time went on. That was about extending the money we had available. It wasn't all going to get eaten up by the big farms, because we have some quite large farms, might not have much eligible area, but they're quite sizable. So that was one way. And the other thing we did was we had a digressive payment system. Poor Department of Agriculture just didn't understand this at all. On which case we paid on the lowest scoring fields first. So this field scoring 7 here is going to pull off the 10 hectare payment at 168. The next field scoring 9, because you've gone over the 10 hectares, is pulling off at the 135. If we'd done it if we paid on the 9 first, you would have got 240. And this was about incentivizing farmers to address the problems on the lower scoring fields first to get things to improve. Again, it's all about carrots. For various reasons, we only paid on field scoring 5 and above. And we realised that farmers were quite happy to sit on a score of 8. They'd go, well, if I'm going to do me water, it's going to cost me this amount. Ah, no, I just sit on the 8, I'm getting enough money. So we increased the jump in payment between 8 and 9 and 9 and 10. The others had a linear relationship and they jumped. Again, it's about carrots. It's nothing scientific about it. It's all about psychology at the end of the day. So some of the benefits of the approach we used, it's relevant. Farmers are producers. We're asking them to deliver conservation as an additional product. They understand products. It's incentive driven. So the better product they deliver, the more money they get. It's not a handout. We have this big thing of agri-environment schemes being seen as farmers' dole. They were getting money for nothing. Like the old gloss scheme, they could get £5,000. They were given back all for it at the end of the day. It's good value for money for a taxpayer or whoever's funding it. If you've got poor performance, you get less money, and there's co-funding the support actions. And what this means is you've not got people taking on jobs and getting money for doing things that they don't need to do. It's only going to those who need to do it and want to do it. And we didn't say penalise them if they didn't do the work. They only got paid. They had to declare it was done. They got paid if it was done. They could declare that they haven't done stuff as well. So what was paid for was actually done. And I think this is a problem with schemes here that as well. People went back 10 years later and found that things actually hadn't happened. It's a total waste of money. It was meaningful and impactful. We had clear, understandable aims for the farmers and for other people, and it benefited many, not just the farmers, but the communities around and the environment and habitats. And really importantly, it raised farmers' awareness. They became more aware of their role in maintaining the habitats, nature, heritage along the way. And it also really boosted local pride. Farmers in the Burren look at farmers with good land and they felt like they were poor relatives. They were grazing a rock. So being part of the project really made them feel proud. And they also were seeing themselves now as partners in conservation, not just the scapegoats for everything that was going wrong. They were seeing themselves in a key role. Now, there's a lot of text on this because I have to keep myself to things. So some of the key principles and lessons, some of them I've already said that we learned. You're going to get better results if it's targeted and relevant to the needs of a particular area. You also get better results, what a lot of people, particularly from the ecology side, don't think of, if you deliver both environmental and social impacts. If you want farming community to deliver things, there has to be good, positive social impacts for them and their families. It's better if you can develop it locally and from ground up, both in development, delivery and in the support. So this was really about not the outside experts coming in and imposing their views. It's about people learning from each other and working together, doing good partnerships. And you, as I said before, you do need to do quite a lot of hand holding. It is different. And it was wonderful when farmers had landed into the office and said to me, you should see my windridge. It looks absolutely fantastic. And I didn't have the heart to tell them it looked like that the year before, but they'd never seen it before. Because you have to remember, these farmers don't go to their windridges in summer. They're all on their greenland in summer. So they often did not see what they were delivering. You need to focus on results and rewards and positives. It's all about carrot, not stick. You need to do this both in the terminology used, particularly language. It's payment for a product. It's not compensation. I always flinch when they talk about compensating farmers. You find something to deliver. There's no pride in being compensated. There's pride in a product. So you need to be positive actions and language. It needs to be farmer friendly, fair and practical. Recognise and respect their needs. Don't impose things just because you don't understand the system, to give them some level of freedom to farm. Have meaningful activities. To minimise the paperwork if possible. They're drowning in paperwork, as is everybody these days. And we did this because of the archaeology in the landscape. We had to do a lot of notifications to the Monument Service. We took all that away from the farm and did it for them. Timely payments. If they're shelling out money to put in water systems, they need their money back quite quickly because things are fairly tight. And you need a definite link between the money they're getting and the results they're delivering, which has been lost in the new Acres programme. And again, it's about continuing to listen, share knowledge and being prepared to compromise. Often farmers that come up to us and still do say, I've thought of a way of doing this, and it'd be another idea, and it can be trialled along the way. Schemes, when you're designing them, they need to be flexible and adaptive. There shouldn't be rigorous rules and regulations, and you have to do it this way. It needs to be able to learn and evolve. The longer the continuity, the better. Ours are cap related, so generally they're 5-6 years to a scheme, and then everything changes for the hell of it, it seems. So in our case, we needed longer contracts. I think you did have longer contracts here. They just weren't very well overseen. And you need to keep trusted relationships there, because you do build up working relationships with people. Big one for me is the administrative systems. The computer systems need to meet the project's needs. At the moment, the acres, the computer says no. And it really is the tail wagging the dog. The scheme should determine the computer system. We've been given the money to develop it. We could have developed something. They didn't. And you need better compatibility between all the different schemes at the end of the day. A lot of times we were asked about scalability. And I differed from my colleagues. They all said, yeah, you can just keep scaling this up. But for me, you couldn't. And I think that's part of the problem with acres. It's tried to go too big. And I think you do need it to keep it targeted in certain areas. Your scalability is better if you can do it with a series of stepping stones where you're learning along the way. And we had the comfort of doing that. And at the end of the day, it's about finding the sweet point between the costs and what it delivers. Looking at acres now, it's almost gone too big. The computer systems didn't work. It's not delivering. It might be relatively cheap, but what's the point? You might as well just give them the money and call it farmer's dole. At the end of the day, it's finding that sweet point where you're going to deliver your conservation needs, but your costs aren't too high. And I believe that can be done. You have to spend money at the end of the day. You can't do this for free. So that's it, really. I mean, there was a lot of work over the time. I've only covered part of it. So what we did is totally adaptable to here. But I think some of the key takeaways are the approach we used, the learnings and the principles we developed along the way.